Okay, we're here today to talk about fighting for common ground, how we can fix the stalemate in Congress with Olympia Snowe, the senator from Maine. I am a fan of your service, and I want to start by thanking you for all that you did in the Congress, and I'm looking forward very much to what you're going to do outside of this system. You actually, so interesting to read. I had read about you departing the Congress, of course, but then when I read your book to learn that you called it a place of burned bridges and scorched earth, that you could no longer, you were leaving because you could no longer fulfill your responsibilities as a problem solver, and that you were embarrassed by the 112th Congress, its partisan bickering and inactivity and refusal to address the vital challenges facing America. You were compelled to leave because you now hope that you can help correct the system from the outside rather than the in. That was bad news, obviously, to people like me and longtime watchers of the Congress who felt that people like you needed to be in it. And as you noted in your book, Bob Schieffer of CBS said, what does it say about the state of our government and politics when serious people like Olympia Snowe conclude that serving in the United States Senate is no longer worth their time and effort? That's the part that should worry the rest of us. So make the case for me and the viewers that you can actually, in leaving so few moderates at all in the Congress, try to change the system from the outside.
And I'm frequently asked that question, but it occurred to me as when I was faced with this sort of cold, stark reality of the question of whether or not it was going to change. Actually, so many people asked me that question in Maine, across the country, and so I started to ponder my own future. You know, it was almost, suddenly. It was over a very short period of time, obviously, because I was planning to run for re-election. Whether or not it would change, would the polarization, dissipate? And I came to the conclusion, regrettably, that it would not be diminished over the short term. And that given the pronounced changes on the outside with campaigns, campaign fundraising, outside organizations that weighed in, the polarization of both of the political parties, and certainly the changes that are going on in my own party and the Republican Party, I just didn't see how the forces from within could be sufficient to outweigh what was happening on the outside. And I decided if I could contribute, the next 6 years in another way, what would it be? And I decided that I had to first reaffirm what people are feeling about Congress, but yes, they're right, that it is too partisan, and two, what can we do about it? That it has been different, because now you're coming into generations of people and generations of lawmakers to think this is the way it is.
Right, right. And for those, that's so interesting. For those of us who've been watching it for so long, and in my case, right before the Republican Revolution in '94, we've seen these changes. We felt them in the electronic media, in the professionalization of politics, the mandate for fundraising, which is so different than those early days, the punishment of cooperation and compromise, and the 24-hour news cycle. It really, it is true that so many lawmakers, and you cite this fact in your book, have just gotten here. So that's the process that they know. And so you write in your book, I heard you in an interview this week, you talked about how in working from the outside, there needs to be a grassroots effort to be a counterweight, an equal counterweight. To the forces of extremism, and that you said that these outside groups they're tireless in their efforts to divide. So obviously there has to be an effort to be a tireless effort to unite. And you said it's imperative we make certain there's a real political benefit and reward to be gained for bipartisanship, so we can break what's become the equivalent of the parliamentary gridlock in Congress. How do we provide a benefit and reward to people like you in the system?
Well, first of all, obviously it's in the elections, most notably, and that you demand bipartisanship and hold candidates and elected officials accountable. Are you being why aren't you working out a solution? Why aren't you in session working out a solution? What do you intend to do if you were elected? about being bipartisan. Are you going to work across party lines? Are you and force them to commit to the whole notion that they'll, you know, work across the political aisle and come up with solutions rather than having constant political standoff. And it is really to turn the tables. Because, you know, the forces of polarization, we know what they've got at stake. I mean, they're well funded, and well organized, and so the same could be true. You know, if the vast population in this country demanded, then insisted upon bipartisanship, and so it is to, you know, be a counterweight, and it also is to change the incentives in the political system and reward those, yes, by voting for those candidates or those elected officials who are, and to vote against those who aren't.
Right.
And I think that is really important because people feel like there's no control, they have no sense of control. But we really do. We have to organize, obviously. But secondly is that each in our own communities and office holders all the way up, you know, because it's also filtering down into the local levels as well. And just say, what are you going to do to solve a problem? You're sitting around a table. You know, have a constant standoff. Imagine if everybody just, you know, stood down because they weren't getting what they wanted 100% of the time in all spheres of life. No one would make a move.
Right. So how are these candidates and office holders going to be monitored? If the forces that divide are monitoring them all the time, how can the supporters of bipartisanship amass the resources and organization to keep track of a member who's not working across the aisle or who is, to reward them in primaries when they do, to punish them when they don't? How does that become, it is going to take money and passion. Do you believe that the disgust is there, the outrage is there, that the passion is there to force that kind of monitoring of politicians the way that those other interests do?
Well, first of all, getting somebody's voting record is, you know, pretty easy these days, and you know there are a lot of analysis that are done by various groups, you know, on the Hill, and publications like the National Journal has conducted a number where you can easily, you know, garner that, but also in real time on the issues that are pending before Congress, and that's critical. Yeah. Because you know, say right now, okay, you know, why aren't they developing a budget? I mean, why aren't they finalizing a budget? I mean, there's a good example of saying America doesn't have a budget because they just won't reconcile their differences. So in real time, they can communicate with social media organizers. I mean, you can use social media for organization purposes and communications. And that's what the opposing side does. And the Bipartisan Policy Center is going to have has a website. We've launched it. And part of what it's going to be is offering options and information to people to know, you know, in real time, you know, what is happening and what lawmakers are championing, you know, efforts to work across the political aisle. I mean, it's that sort of thing that's got to happen in order to turn the tide against what's occurring inside Congress.
Right. I want to just mention some of the issues you've been involved in so that the listeners and the viewers know what an expert you are in process, and we're going to get to that because that's so critical to the breakdown. You have been a champion of reducing the debt, of fiscal sanity, as you call it, a champion of a balanced budget amendment. You have worked tirelessly on telecom legislation. You are the inspiration behind E-rate, which is an effort to wire most of the country's schools. You've worked on the child tax credit, Head Start, child support enforcement. You are also a leader in establishing LIHEAP, home heating support, the Equal Rights Amendment, pension reform, welfare reform, Family Medical Leave Act, S-CHIP, Violence Against Women Act, legislation on unfunded mandates, Congressional Accountability Act, and such a leader on women's health. And I think that's so impressive, including the inclusion of women in medical trials, cancer research, and legislation to end discrimination by insurers against anyone on the basis of genetic information or the use of genetic testing. And I think that is so incredible. So along the path that became more challenging, you became obviously so familiar with process, both in the Maine state legislature and then when you came here in your service in the House and then in the Senate. Talk a little to people. I know C-SPAN viewers are very familiar with the process in Congress of legislating, but for someone who might be flipping around, I want them to know why as you seek to engage them out in the country in the process and in reforming the system, why it's important that you talk about filibuster and amendments and open rules.